Hello sewers and welcome. I'm Debbie from Sew Simple Bags, and today just a quick hand sewing tutorial. Oh groan, yes, I feel exactly the same way. I am not a big fan of hand sewing anything, but there are just some times when getting out a needle and thread will actually make the finish on your project that much better. So today we're going to look at a stitch called the invisible stitch, or the ladder stitch, or the invisible ladder stitch. And basically this is useful for when you cannot sew from the wrong side of your fabric. Here, for example, we have a bag lining. So I've just mocked up a simple bag lining, side seams, bottom seam, and there is a gap in this seam at the bottom here, which is the gap that we leave open in our lining so that we can turn the bag the right way out. However, once we've got the lining and the bag in place and we turn the right side out, then the only thing we have access to is our lining from the right side, which means we need to close the gap in the lining from the right side, and we need to make those stitches look invisible. The invisible ladder stitch is also good for any other situations where you need to sew from the right side of a project. So for example, if you are making a pin cushion and you have that one stuffed and ready to sew closed, or especially for things like soft toys and teddy bears, then you're always going to sew it, turn it right side out, stuff it, and then you need to close that little gap in the stitching. And this is what the invisible ladder stitch is going to do. So you will need a needle and some sewing thread. I've just got regular sewing cotton. I've doubled it up and put a little knot in the bottom. Now, my first tip in order to get some really great results on the bottom of your bag is to take a look where you have the gap in your lining just here. You have some stitches this side and you have some stitches this side, and I'm going to recommend that you press your fabric back against these stitches just here and just finger press that in a straight line. I'm going to do the same on this other side. Press the fabric right back against the stitches and finger press. And then when I pull taut between these two, this comes in a nice straight line, and I can run my fingers along here and get a nice crease in the fabric. And I'm going to flip over and do that on the other side too. So zooming in for a closer look where I've got my stitches, I'm folding back the fabric. Same on this other side. Pulling it a little taut till I get that straight line, and then creasing the fabric. You can even take this over to your ironing board and press it with your iron if you want a nice finish. When we've got both sides done, if you look just here, the little mouth, the little gap that we have, now we have two folds of fabric just here. Everything lines up nice and evenly, and this gives us a great template which we can use to sew our stitches later on. So to make those creases just a little bit more pronounced, I'm going to take this over to my ironing board and then we'll come back for some sewing. Okay, I'm back, and as you can see, I've got some really nice crisp pressed edges here on my lining. The lining's now been turned the right side out, so our raw edges and our seams are all hidden, and this is now the gap that we have in the bottom of our lining. Now what you could do, of course, is just take it to the sewing machine and just sew a flat line of stitches over here, but they would be very visible, and also it would create like a ridge in the bottom of your fabric. So what we're going to do is do this invisible ladder stitch. Now obviously I've got a really bright contrasting thread here so that you can see my stitches, and so I'm never going to be able to make a truly invisible finish with this, but if you use a matching thread, then you should be almost impossible to see your stitches at the end if you've done it nice and neatly. So I've started off with double thread with a knot in the end, and I'm just going to take that and bury it down inside here and just take a little tuck in my seam allowance just to anchor the thread. Pop the thread end and the knot down in, and then where I have the end stitch just here, the end of my seam, I'm going to bring my needle up at that point, and we're now ready to sew. And basically what we are creating is a ladder. So we're creating rungs that go across, and then we're creating the handrails that go along in this direction. So our handrails are this way, our rungs go across the seam in this direction. So where our thread comes out is where our needle goes back in, but on the other side. So directly on that fold, my needle goes back down in, and then I'm just taking a tiny little stitch along that fold, and my needle comes back out again. Pull the thread. So now it's coming out on this side. So we put our fabrics together, and the needle goes down through the fold exactly opposite where the thread comes out on this side. And again, I take a little stitch in the fold. Oh, got a knot already. And pull that through. My thread's a little bit cheap and knotty. There we go, let's see. Okay. So that is the first rung in our ladder, just here. You can see going in this direction. So now our handrail is going this way. So we put the fabric edges back together, and we put the needle down through the fold, exactly opposite where the thread comes out on the other side. It's a bit tricky, especially seeing my eyesight isn't so good these days. And then I take a little stitch through that fold, come out again, pull the thread, and I've created another little rung. And again, so I put the two edges of the fabric together, and where the thread comes out this side is where I put the needle down on the other side. Through the fold that we've pressed into the fabric, take a little stitch up the handrail, and out we come again. Continue to go on, exactly where the threads come out. The needle goes into the fold on that side, along the fold for a little stitch, and out we come again. And as you can see the progress, we're gradually making our way up the handrail by making all of these little ladder steps, and I can open them back out so you can see just here the rungs on our ladder as we go. So let's pull those closed. The fabric kind of hides most of those stitches. Down through the handrail, another little stitch and out. Same again, back down through the fold on the opposite side. Take a little stitch and out. I'm going to leave these a little looser this time so you can see the rungs being formed. There we go. And there we are, some more rungs in our ladder. And when you have a few, you can just pull them tight and your stitches kind of disappear into this seam just here. As you can see, you can just see tiny little bits of blue there where I've got the contrasting thread. But if you're doing it with a matching thread, those will really disappear. So I'm going to carry on now and get more towards up the end just here, and then I'll show you how to finish. Now here we are almost right at the end. I've just got space, I think, to put in one more stitch. And then instead of my needle coming out into the ladder, I'm going to try and come out right in this center seam. There we are, so my stitches are all now hidden, and my needle is coming out here right where the stitches on the inside are finished. And now we just need to knot off our thread. So I'm going to put it again down through the center seam and pull out. There we go. So that's taken it away. Then back in again where my needle came out. And just take a tiny stitch. And I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle a couple of times. My threads are not ideally long enough. There we go. Wrapped it around a couple of times, pull the needle through, and that should give us a knot in our thread just here. And then I will try and bury that back down inside. So I'll put my needle back down through again. And then just come out somewhere over here. And as I pull, I'm basically pulling that end away. And depending on the size of your knot, you may or may not be able to get that to pop down inside your seam. I can't quite do that without pulling, I think, a little bit too hard. So you can just about see a bit of thread just there. Snap off that end. The end falls back down inside the lining and is hidden. And now here is my seam. I can give that another little quick press with an iron just to smooth it out. And other than my little knot here at the end, even with that very high contrasting blue thread, you really can't see very much. So those stitches really are pretty invisible. A little bit of a finish pressing on there and that will look really good. So I hope this has been useful. This is an ideal way to close up the gap in the bottom of your lining when you're sewing a bag. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll subscribe to the channel and hope to see you at Sew Simple Bags very soon.